This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, we preview the World Design Congress taking place in London next week. Plus, a studio visit to Abe Rogers to discuss his latest exhibition, Richard Rogers Talking Buildings. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's program. I'm joined in the studio by Grace Charlton. It's the usual. Grace Charlton, what's going on?
Hi, we've got a London special, which is very exciting.
We do have a London special, and which is special given you're barely in London.
I know, and neither are you, but we do love living here.
Truly, and I think the beauty of living here is sometimes some of the best architecture and design is right on our doorstep, and it's important that we take a moment to actually appreciate it, which is what we're doing with the World Design Congress, which is returning to London for the first time since 1969. What is it, Grace Charlton?
I know, I didn't know much about it and I felt silly for not knowing that much about it, but it's a sort of roving event. It takes place every 2 years. Last time 2 years ago, it took place in Tokyo, and before that, it was in Hyderabad. But it's coming back to London, which is super exciting for the first time since 1969, as you said. It sounds like the process of bidding for it as well to the World Design Organization. It's kind of like bidding for the Olympics to this body. What
is the ambition and the aim of the event? And I know you're going to get into that because we're going to play a discussion you had with Minnie Moll, the chief executive of the Design Council, who's part of the team behind the event in London. But what's the aim or the ambition of this?
I think it's mostly education, networking, and trying to get people interested in the value of design and how it can help your day-to-day life, but also bigger projects. I think it's almost like the UN of design.
So I guess almost like a little bit of benchmarking, a little bit of discussion about like where should the industry be moving, what should it be focusing on. I'm curious as well, maths isn't my strong point. I did fail at it at high school, but I don't know how many years since 1969, decades. I guess the city of London itself will have changed so much since then. It's being held at the Barbican this year. What's the significance of the venue or the importance of hosting something like this in a building like the Barbican?
I think it's sort of leading by example and showing what great architecture can do. And the Barbican remains to this day a really important piece of architecture, and a very utopian one at that is very unique to London in many ways. So I think it is a bit of a coup to host it there. And there are going to be all these talks and panel discussions held in the auditoriums of the Barbican, and I'm sure fantastic lunch breaks as well. Actually, Minnie in the interview said that she wanted the lunch breaks to be over an hour and a half long so that people could really network.
Actually talk to each other.
Exactly. It's not like a quick sandwich in the cafeteria, you know?
Okay, I like this. So there seems to be like some genuine energy behind it in terms of like it's not being held at a conference centre that usually are kind of depressing. This is like in actual lived-in architecture, which I think is phenomenal. Well, why don't we throw to your interview with Minnie Moll now?
Lots of architects might go to an architecture event, industrial designers, industrial event. Very intentional from the Design Council. We believe in the intelligent collision of different design disciplines coming together. Fashion designers, industrial designers, scientists, academics, policymakers, business leaders, because that is where the partnership and collaboration has to happen to address the climate crisis. So that's very intentional. We really set ourselves a big vision for this. We wanted to have breadth of age, diversity of every sort. We had to showcase some of the very great designers of the UK, because we're hosting it here. We also very much wanted to get representation from around the world, Southern Hemisphere. 135 speakers, aged from 22 to 90. I think there's 18 different countries represented in the speaker lineup. And then other things in the mix. We've got big global businesses, chief design officers. We have got small enterprises. We've got climate activists. We've got literally rock stars, Brian Eno. So there's this real sense of the breadth of voice that we're wanting to bring.
And what you were saying about sort of a global idea, the theme this year is Design for Planet. I also love the idea of a World Design Organization. It feels very United Nations, collective hive mind thinking for a better world. There's something very utopian about it.
There is, and when we were set out the kind of vision for what the event would be like and feel like, it is not a conference. It is a global gathering of the design community. So very much that sense of coming together. And when we're doing the speaker briefings, we're asking people to talk about what hasn't gone so well, have a real spirit of generosity and partnership and knowledge sharing. This is not a come and show off on the stage. This is a come and galvanise, inspire, support. We're trying to create a movement with the Design Council's Design for Planet mission, and we're really wanting to use Congress as a catalyst to really ignite that sense of movement when everyone goes back to their respective countries.
I actually think it's a great time to be into design, like as a topic. I saw on the Design Council website earlier that it's growing in the UK at twofold the rate that it was a few years ago. I think it is a really important industry for the UK and the world. It gives me hope when I think about design and stuff like this and people putting their brains together to fix issues and all of that.
It is, and I think, some of the voices that will be at the Barbican. Here's one of the sessions I'm excited about is Kate Raworth, the economist who wrote Donut Economics. My colleague Kat and I met her just before we announced the launch of our Design for Planet mission 4 years ago. And she said in our meeting, if you're not designing for planet, what planet are you on? And it's like, oh, thank you, Kate. That's been one of the lines we've used most in our campaign since then. So we have Kate Raworth with Mariana Mazzucato in conversation. Two amazing female powerhouses. And so that content, when you're talking about economics, about politics, about geopolitics, all of those kind of things that they will be bringing into the conversation. One of the reasons we bid to host the World Design Congress here in the UK is we are really concerned that we must not be complacent. The UK and London as a city is still very much viewed internationally as one of the leading design cities. But a lot of other cities now have a phenomenal design weeks, festivals. We do need our government, in particular, to really support design and to help make sure we can keep on putting on these incredible events and showcases. Because there's great design going on all over the world. We just can't be complacent, which is one of the reasons we thought let's have this catalytic moment for design that we hope can kind of ripple through.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of goodwill for it, but it almost needs like a sort of push to consolidate into a cohesive product.
Yeah, London Design Biennale, etc.
Yeah.
But again, these things do need financial support to be able to put them on. And I know that a lot of the organisations, very inspiring design organisations here in the UK, have struggled to keep putting on events, shows at the scale that they want to because they need funding. And that's government funding and private sector funding.
This event will have government funding, I believe.
It has,
and it's got the support of the mayor.
It has got some government and private sector funding. One of the things we set out to achieve is to have all the people that were involved as partners, sponsors, to really be people that are on a Design for Planet journey and can truly bring rich content to the event. So if they're going to be speaking, we're very confident that they're bringing great content to the stage.
So the programme of speakers is also very starry. What highlights are you looking forward to?
I've got to mention Norman Foster. He was 90 earlier this year, probably the most famous architect in the world, and for his incredible impact on architecture over those decades. I'm so excited to hear him speak and reflect on his perspective on designing for planet. I love Thomas Heatherwick. He will bring his incredibly thoughtful and different way that he thinks about architecture and placemaking. Someone that people might not have seen speak. A tour de force is Leila Ajarolu, Australian. She is a dynamo. She's been a thought leader in sustainable design for years. But wow, buckle up when she comes on stage. She just really is a tour de force in terms of how she delivers. And then I always think at any event I go, some of the stories I come away with were from surprising places. We've got so many unusual people working on smaller projects, and I fully expect them to be some of the people that wow me. You tip up at something and someone just has some beautiful story to share that's really inspiring. And this is really an observation about events and just how to do some of it differently. When we knew that we were going to be hosting the World Design Congress, we really wanted it to be a very different and very special gathering, very definitely not a conference. So there's a number of things we've done that I believe are going to really make that come true. One is that we wanted an MC, a pilot, a host, someone that would really take us on this 2-day journey, because nearly all of the people are there for the 2 days. So we have Dr. Stephanie Hare, who is a BBC presenter from a programme, Artificial Intelligence. She's super bright, and she's going to lead us through the 2 days and be someone that can reflect when we've heard different things and challenge us, but also set out some principles about how we're all going to behave with each other across the 2 days. Things like speak to your neighbour, do not leave gaps when you come back in. The spirit of how we're going to be amazing together.
That was Minnie Moll, the Chief Executive of the Design Council there. And the World Design Congress is taking place on the 9th and 10th of September 2025 at the Barbican Centre in London. It's over to you, Nick. You had a cultural outing in London, in central London no less, not even east.
So it was actually a nice little detour on my commute home, but I went to the Sir John Soane's Museum in London, which is currently hosting an exhibition, Richard Rogers Talking Buildings, which is curated by his son, Abe Rogers, who also runs an amazing design studio in its own right, in his own right. A big part of his work over the previous decades has been curating the shows of his father, Richard Rogers. So anytime Richard was presenting work, would typically be the person behind it, curating it. And this showcase was the first exhibition he's done on his father's body of work since he passed away in 2021. And I guess to give a little bit of context, this showcase charted Richard's work from the 1960s to the 2020s. Like, this is an all-encompassing showcase, and a big part of it was looking at the fact that for Richard, a lot of his work was intended as physical manifestations of his own beliefs, which I just found really beautiful. Like, I think it's very easy or perhaps tempting as an architect to just be somebody that, like, maybe takes the quickest, easiest route, wants to just, if we're talking about housing, maximising that footprint, maximising the developer's return on investment, which I guess puts them in the good books, and maybe you'll win some more work down the line. But Richard was very, very set on, I guess, creating architecture that had meaning, and there was some value and some give back to the local communities. I mean, you've been to the Centre Pompidou. That's perhaps his most famous collaboration with Renzo Piano.
Yeah.
For our listeners, paint an initial picture of it, encountering it.
I really like his style. He's a bit of a maverick in terms of the architecture he pioneered. There's the Lloyds Bank building in London, which is really famous, and then there's the Centre Pompidou in Paris. But he had this style called Bowellism, which is when all the sort of services and the HVAC and the plumbing is on the outside of the building rather than inside. Literally like the intestines of the building being on display. That's why it's called Bowellism.
Isn't
that cool?
No, but and that's amazing, and that's some of the work that is discussed in this showcase. Both the Lloyds Bank building and Centre Pompidou are in there. I guess what this exhibition shows you is that there's additional thinking beyond just creating space inside the building by moving the functions to the outside. Lloyds Bank building, for instance, was about, bringing character and humanity to a large scale commercial project. I mean, typically, if you're talking an office building, you're probably talking floors stacked up on floors, not a lot of natural light unless you're on the outside edge of it. But by moving, I guess, these essential functions to the outside of the building, they were able to create a massive atrium that brought heaps of light in, which brought life into the building, into what is typically a sterile space. So that was, I guess, a great example of him bringing physical form to his own beliefs of the need to bring character and humanity to a project. And it's similar with the Centre Pompidou. I mean, it was all about connection between people and connection to place and respecting the context that you're sat in. So, and we talked a little bit about it in the interview, but with Abe, Richard really wanted this grand plaza in front of the building, and by doing that, they were able to sort of invite the city in. But I think that's enough of me kind of going on about this, because I could go on at length. It was so much fun to talk to Abe. Let's hear from him now.
If you're a sculptor, or if you're a writer, or if you're a cook, the most interesting people are using their skills in order to change your position. Now, that position can be political, can be about sustainability, or it can be about access. Richard's fascination was with this idea of socialism, of this idea of making the city a better place. He always refers back to the Athenæans who say, I want to leave the city better than I found it. So that was really his starting point. He built a house for my grandparents in Cornwall. When he talks about that house, he said, and it's a very kind of Frank Lloyd Wright, very beautiful, poor materials used with very high craft. After 4 years of designing and building it with Norman Foster, my mother Sue Rogers in Team 4, he says, bankrupted us, near bankrupted the client, and near bankrupted the builder. So I've got to find a different way to build. This is inaccessible. He'd spent a lot of time in Yale, and then kind of looking across America, fascinated by Frank Lloyd Wright, but also by the case study houses, by Eames. So he went back to looking at kind of a modular construction, and he developed a concept for the Ideal Home show called the Zip Up House.
And that's featured in this exhibition?
That is featured in this exhibition. That's where it starts. And the idea of talking buildings, these buildings are kind of talking from each other and learning from each other as his mind evolves. Now, Richard is really good at assembling a team. So he brings together his team. I think on the Zip Up House, John Young, Laurie Abbott, my mum. They worked this idea of creating a house made out of refrigeration van components, very well insulated, clipped together, plug in your battery-orientated car, and you create a building in 1969 that you can heat 2-kilowatt heater. The other interesting thing about this building, it has no interior, it's open plan, it has services. The objects that go in there create the building. So in a way, the opposite of many architects with a fetish of control. Richard loved control, but he also wanted to give things away to the others. So you have this house that you can zip together, you can open up, you can have your garden wherever you want to have it, you can punch your windows, you can heat it easily, you can charge your car. Foundations are just on earth boards, so you can plonk it anywhere to an extent.
This is in the 1960s. This is incredibly forward thinking. This is a concept that feels particularly relevant still today. You're talking there about there's leaving an open plan, there's a democracy to it, there's an accessibility to it.
There's a transparency to it. These have all become the kind of manifesto that occupies his career. Architecture should be whatever they want to be, but for me, the work that is interesting is political. And when we look at the speed of development in a city like London, and we look at the volume of mediocre developer-led buildings completely echoed by the way they're constructed. So we end up just hanging cladding and shitty cladding on buildings, bricks which aren't bricks, steel which isn't steel, a fetish aesthetic of something which could be. Then, I think we're failing for the people that are going to use them. We're failing for the developer because we're only creating something which will turn a profit over 10 years' time. So maybe the first developer will make money, but in the long run, it's going to disappear. And we're really failing the city and the sustainability lobby. So we have to be political and we have to look at a long term. We need to go back to cathedral thinking.
I want to jump to another project that I feel like hits some of those notes that you just mentioned there, but the tree house, which was a concept your father developed in the 2010s, almost perhaps addressing some of those housing issues. Could you maybe explain the concept, visualize it, and then talk about how this might eventually actually be applied? Because I feel like that's also some of the challenges. Are we too short-sighted in the way that we look at how we're building? Are we not considering, bigger pictures perhaps?
Definitely we're too short-sighted and we're not considering bigger pictures. And we have to move away from the developer-led 10-year profit plan. That is absolutely unsustainable. Treehouse was a response to the 2015 Venice Biennale by Rem Koolhaas, which was about housing, and he wanted to create a housing solution which was democratic, but it was giving value back to the consumer. It wasn't about offering social housing as the minimum standard. It was about trying to maximize the offering. So it was creating these timber glass shoeboxes in a way that you built at the bottom of the tower, and then you just assembled them. And the roof of one shoebox becomes the garden to the next. So everyone has a garden. You have a play on shadow. There's lots of voids there. So it's a very articulated form of architecture. So suddenly these very minimal, I say shoeboxes, they're decent sizes, 2-bedroom apartments, like 100 square meters. You assemble it very quickly and you end up with these voids. And it also opens up for future programs. So you can add, you can subtract. This thing stays alive. It's not frozen in concrete. It is a form of live living architecture. The place where Richard's career was unsuccessful was he designed 3 amazing concepts for social housing, plus some others. One, the career house for industrial production, which is kind of steel made using shipbuilding, the zip-up house, and the third one being the tree house. And none of them were ever realised. The poetry of his work became desired by bigger, more large-scale corporate entities and national entities, which are the projects which we talk about. But these amazing offices which get built. But his passion, his heart was in this more humble kind of social housing.
I want to jump to some of those maybe bigger projects, but again, talking about, I guess, a belief system. And there seems to be, and it comes through in the exhibition, this belief that you can bring character and humanity in all manner of spaces. Just because it's a shopping mall doesn't mean it has to be sterile. Just because it's a banking building doesn't mean it has to be boring. Just because it's an airport doesn't mean it has to be volumeless and characterless. So 2 of the buildings, Lloyd's of London Commercial Headquarters and Madrid T4. Why was bringing personality to these spaces also important to Richard's beliefs?
Lloyd's, I think it's really interesting to talk about because Lloyd's is, after the Pompidou, he has no work for 5 years. The Pompidou, which is now, has changed the cultural sector forever, in its immediacy, was in a terrible state. And he always tells the story, standing outside the Pompidou in the rain and a very sweet old woman offering him an umbrella. And he said, hey, I designed that building. And she took the umbrella away and hit him with it. What the fuck have you done to my beautiful Paris? But he loved creating this incredibly provocative modern building, which was very generous in what it gave back to the public and it gave to the curators in the middle of this very historic section in Paris. And this conversation between the old and the new, which occurs regularly because some of Paris is 18th century, some is 20th century, some is 17th, 15th. What is perceived as old now has this large span. He always talks about the 800-year span that sits across the Mark Square in Venice. Can we stop being afraid of the new? There's always been something new. So he goes into this very beautiful part of London, it's very compressed, with people like Soane, with a whole series of amazing buildings all around it. He has this complex site. So he says, right, I'm going to make an oblong building, and then all the complexities in the site, I'm going to put all my services in it. So the interior of this oblong building is completely free. It's free for the insurance brokers to work and use the office as best I can. I'm not allowed to let people look into that building. So I'm going to create a special glass which is prismatic, which will bring light into the building without giving a view. And then I'm going to make, which at the time is very radical, a giant atrium which will pull this light well down, almost like a cathedral. So suddenly you had this kind of cathedral-like castle with this kind of lobster skeleton on the outside that really talks to the city. You can't pass it without smiling. There's a whole communication talking to these buildings of these different periods all around it and consuming the whole site with this dynamic form. Now, some of the things which he really loves, he can't achieve there, like porosity. Porosity was really important. And you see the porosity in the Pompidou, you see it in the housing projects. He can't because of the private nature of it. But what he can do is he can make a building which is generous to those that are passing by its almost Baroque, Gothic activities appearing on the outside. Not even like either of those words, but I think that it's impossible to kind of deny that effect of this kind of shadow and play. Which takes us to the streets, and what Richard really loved was creating public realm. And he spent as much time trying to redesign London, Paris, Barcelona as he did designing buildings. I'm very proud to say that I think London is a very different place post-Richard. For papers that he wrote and for the work of the Urban Task Force, they have changed the nature of our city, of our parks, of our tree planting, of our pedestrianisation.
Why should architects care about public realm? Why should that be part of their responsibility? Why not just worry about the plot that you've been given and building something there?
Architects have to go beyond the building. We have to look at how the building hits the ground. We need to look at our streets. We need to look at our public realm. We see everyone running around eating sandwiches as they go, and shitty sandwiches at that. Let's get more public benches, and maybe people stop and eat their sandwich slow, and then maybe they'll talk to the person next to them. One of our greatest killers at the moment in the city is loneliness and inactivity. The streets can play a huge part in breaking those barriers down and making the street a place where you meet people rather than you buzz by it, where you encourage people not to get a train or a car, but to walk. We encourage the idea of promenading down the streets, and the more alive the streets can be. I'm not talking about public art and plinths, which I find quite annoying. I'm talking about using artists in a way to transform the city, to have multiple brains, to have philosophers working on the city, economists, artists on these floor plans. So we see a kind of neurological transformation occurring through this fabric.
If we come back to Pompidou, still radical. I mean, it's still striking every time you see it, but there was a generosity to it as well with that enormous piazza. You mentioned St. Mark's Square then. Is there also something to be said about remembering we're not always reinventing the wheel, but these forms that we're tapping into, that your father tapped into, have been around and inherent to the best architecture for the longest time? You talked about cathedrals alongside Lloyd's. Is there something to be said about helping people look at architecture differently? Is that also what this exhibition is about?
I think the role of the architect has to change. We're chronically running out of materials, we're overheating. We need to go back to looking at how we can transform existing buildings rather than knock down and build new. We need to look at the kind of public realm and how we can improve the quality of our life. Our cities are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We've got to process people in a more humanistic fashion. It's not about bricks and mortar. We need to create a more intellectual, a more nimble architect who's more curious about their role across society. And we're starting to see that.
I want to ask, what do you want people to take away from this showcase, from Richard Rogers' Talking Buildings?
The architecture is more than architecture. It's about the ideas, and it's a form of working with humans. It all starts with the scale of the human, and every building, everything we do must be about how the person enjoys that building. And often people spend more time inside a building than outside a building. They spend more time walking along the street than they do gazing at the spectacle. I'm slightly bored of spectacle per se. I want diagrams that embrace life. I'm not asking for mundane architecture. I want brilliant architecture. I want brilliant streets. I want brilliant interiors.
Beliefs has been so key to this. A few of your father's architectural beliefs, we've touched on them. Are there any that stand out to you?
Well, I think Richard always talks about from the house to the city, or there's a great essay by Ernesto Rogers, Richard's uncle, which was from the spoon to the city. So it's this idea that every component becomes part of the bigger picture. A neighbourhood is a collection of houses, a city is a collection of neighbourhoods and parks and trees, and it's bringing all these elements together. But it's really about taking a long-term vision of what is happening and where it's going. And we need to embrace the fact that new is only new today, tomorrow it's old.
You've been influenced by your relationship with your father. You talk about learning more as you're curating these exhibitions, your own beliefs as a practitioner. What are some of your key ones and how do they come out in your work?
We really passionately believe in the creation of communities of care, where we talk about the streets, but doing a lot of work around the health sector, around the NHS, around different kind of hospital hubs, and how in order to create a hospital of the future, it needs to be based on culture. And we can't put things in boxes. We can't build hospitals which are fortresses. We need to go back to the anchoring of these spaces and create hospitals more like cathedrals, which are generous to the people that are consuming them and are as much about health creation as they are about fixing the sick. When we think about a hospital, we need to think about the workforce. They're there all the time, and how we can improve their quality of life. We want to make humans' lives better. We want to use design as a political tool, a political activation.
You know, this is such a big question, but how do we start to change that? How do you as a practitioner start to change that? It feels like there's a lot of weight on responsibility on the architect to try and shift these positions that we've found ourselves in.
We need to establish collective intelligence, and we need to respect the full breadth of the team. Richard was very good at this. We need to be working with neurologists and doctors and artists and engineers and landscapers from the beginning. We need to work with economists, the power of the economist. In order to make any change, we need to understand the economical benefits of the work that we're doing and the value that we're creating. I'm not talking about fueling neoliberalism and capitalism. I'm talking about understanding the balance of what one thing does for the other. So we need to look at these things holistically to build a proper picture to create a better society.
That was the architect Abe Rogers there. Nick, what was your favourite building present in the exhibition?
Some of the original, conceptual ideas that they explored in the form of models they present there. Some of the most exciting stuff was almost what wasn't built. We talked a lot about the treehouse project, but there was also the zip-up house, which was kind of like this tubular form, like extruded. It almost looked like an extruded piece of aluminium that you could kind of change and adapt and slide to move with changing lifestyle needs and demands. And I just think that was so amazing, almost so revolutionary.
Maybe we should bring it back. Maybe
it was never built. Maybe we commission it.
Yeah.
Maybe Monocle Design commissions a house. If not, then go check out the exhibition, Richard Rogers, Talking Buildings. That's on at the Sir John Soane's Museum in London until the 21st of September 2025. Grace Charlton, that's all for today's show. For those of you who aren't done, there is more design stories with our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, that airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans, with editing help from Hunter Wang. I'm Nick Manise. This show was co-hosted by Grace Charlton. Thanks for listening.